Hello, my name is Marianne and I'm an alcoholic. I'd like to welcome you to Recovery in Action Life on Life's Terms. This is an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. We're glad you're all here, especially newcomers. In keeping with our singleness of purpose and our third tradition, which states that the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking, we ask that all who participate confine their discussion to their problems with alcohol. This is an open Big Book step study meeting where we discuss the 12 steps of recovery as they're written in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, with the focus on their application in everyday life and recovery. This is the third session of the fifth cycle of the workshop that was presented on February 17th, 2024, where we completed step 3 and began step 4. If you would like to contribute to the seventh tradition, you may do so using the QR codes displayed. Contributions are applied towards the group's expenses and support our service offices. Recordings of the workshop are available, and if you would like to be placed on the distribution list, please send an email to recoveryinaction462@gmail.com to receive the links. These links are unlisted and not public. I request that you not share them at the public level or post on any social media sites. The workshop typically begins with a brief meditation in which an inspirational music video is played. Because of copyright restrictions, it cannot be on the video. However, a link is provided, and I suggest you take a minute, view the video, and take a brief meditation for yourself before you begin the workshop. As the recording begins, the workshop's already in session. Feel free to contact me if you have any additional questions or require my assistance further. I hope you enjoy the workshop. Another custom of this group is to start the workshop by saying the full version of the Serenity Prayer. We're all familiar with the first part, but many of us are unaware that there is a second part to it. And I believe it's this second part of the prayer that reflects what recovery is all about. So if you would all please join me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as the pathway to peace, taking as he did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. Amen. Where we started out with the review of the Big Book. Now we're actually in the third session of the fifth cycle of this unique workshop, where it's a little bit different than your typical Big Book meeting, because we really focus on doing a very high level overview where we dive into the text specifically as it relates to working the steps. So when we start in the Big Book, when you really get down to it, what the Big Book is a book of instructions on how to work the 12 steps. And the 12 steps are the instructions on how to get rid of the things that are blocking us off from our higher power, how to get connected to God, and how to stay surrendered from whatever is making our life unmanageable. Merely reading the Big Book without experiencing it is not working the steps. You're just reading the book. It's like reading the instructions on, say, how to swim. You can read the instructions, you can read how the buoyancy and the water and the floating but until you actually jump in the water, you cannot learn how to swim. So you can't learn how to work the steps just by reading the book. You have to do it. And for many years, I was under the impression that just by going to Big Book meetings and step meetings where we read the Big Book, we read the 12 and 12. In my mind, that's what I thought was actually doing it. But what I found out was I had to find someone who could actually take me through the Big Book and explain to me how to do what it was that it was saying. What used to happen is I would ask questions when they would say you have to work the steps. I'd say, well, how do I do that? And I was told, don't worry about it, just don't drink and go to meetings. Well, just not drinking is not going to have me become recovered, because the cover page of the big book states that this is the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. And the definition of recovered is the problem is removed. I don't have to make a chance as to whether or not I drink, because I don't even think about it. I automatically turn to God instead of alcohol when I'm upset, and alcohol is no longer an option to solve any of my problems. Self-centeredness and selfishness is gone. I'm no longer angry, fearful, or harmful, and my old destructive ways of thinking and acting have been replaced by new peaceful ones. Another definition of this comes from page 84 of the big book, and this is where it becomes a way of life. And this, again, is the 10th step. There's a lot of promises in the book. There are more than just the 9th step promises. And this is the 10th step promise, which states that we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol. For by this time, sanity will have returned. We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. We react sanely and normally, and we will find that this has happened automatically. We will see that our new attitude towards liquor has been given us without any thought or any effort on our part. It just comes, and that's the miracle of it. We're not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we've been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We've not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. We are neither cocky nor are we afraid. And that's our experience as long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. To go on a little bit further with this, on page 27, it defines recovered as ideas, emotions, and attitudes which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. Additionally, the appendix in the spiritual experience, the description of recovered is that it is a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism, has manifested itself among us in many different forms. And then the foreword to the first edition states that we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. This is the purpose, to show other men and women, other alcoholics, how we've done it is the purpose of the book. And then it later goes on to say that the only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. However, the desire to stop drinking is not the only requirement to become recovered. There's other things that are involved, such as being willing and actually doing everything that the big book says to do. So, the first week we went over an overview of everything, and last week we went over steps. One, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. And that's really important, just that acknowledgement, that admission that we are alcoholic, that self-knowledge. We know that we're powerless over alcohol, that our lives are unmanageable. However, as a real alcoholic, the only thing that self-knowledge does is make me realize that I cannot take just one drink without being physically driven to take one drink after another. And then this then allows me the opportunity, if I'm spiritually fit, to pass on that first drink. And I can only do this on a continuous basis if I'm connected to my higher power, which brings us to step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And that's where we left off last week. We covered steps 1 and 2. This week, we are starting step 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Step 3 is only making a decision. For many, many years, I didn't realize that. For 30 something years, I never saw those first 3 words. I thought that in the third step, I actually turned my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood him. The thing that's really beautiful about this book is you really have to read it and read what it says, comprehend what it says. Because at this point, I don't have the power to turn over my will, which is my thoughts, my lives, my actions, over to my higher power. My character defects and my belief that I'm in control won't let me. So I can only decide to give the higher power. I can only decide to give the higher power that we described when doing the step 2 exercises. If you look at those characteristics that you gave your higher power in those exercises, there's absolutely nothing scary or hard about making the decision. What step 3 invites you to do is become your own theologian, to create your own idea of God that allows you to trust in something greater than yourself. It's this fact that makes practicing the 12 steps a spiritual discipline and not a religious one. Again, step 3 is only a decision, and this is on page 63. It's making a decision to turn my life and my will over to the care of God. Only a decision. When I did step 3, I didn't have the power to turn my life and my will over. If I had that power at step 3, this would only be a 3-step program instead of a 12-step one. All I'm doing in step 3 is making a decision to give my concept of a higher power a try. And remember, when we went over last week, when we were talking about step 2, we talked about each person in those activities that we did. You had a chance to really define the characteristics that you would want from your higher power. And so the 3rd step prayer is on page 63 of the big book. And it's one of my favorite prayers, because what it's basically saying is, God, I offer myself to thee to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. And what I'm saying here, if I really look at what I'm saying to my higher power, is I'm saying, I am yours. That's it. You do with me what you think you need to do. Relieve me of the bondage of self. Now, when I look at the bondage of self, that's where I'm bound up in my character defects that have been ruling my life and tyrannizing me up to this point. They tyrannize me with drinking and being drunk all the time and being powerless over alcohol And then they also tyrannize me in being selfish and self-centered and all of those things that go along with that. I am asking my higher power, my God, to relieve me of that bondage so that I can be of service to him. And then I'm asking my higher power to take away all of those difficulties so that victory over them will bear witness to those that I would help. Remember, even in that video, it comes from bearing witness. Like I was given the gift of sobriety, and now I'm here to help you so that I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. So I'm showing that I am living my life the way I'm asking God to do it. I am offering. I'm not doing it yet. I'm offering to do this. This is where I'm saying what I'm willing to do. And all that's needed in step 3 is faith. Faith is a state of openness and trust. An analogy of this would be that when you're swimming, you don't grab a hold of the water. Instead, you relax and you float. The attitude of faith is to let go and become open to the truth, whatever that truth might turn out to be. You find your truth by completing the 4th step inventories and then using this information to get rid of everything that is blocking you off from your higher power, because that bondage of self serves as a wall and it's a block to your higher power. But this is basically a very simple thing, and it completes the first 3 steps, which built the foundation for identifying the problem, finding what the solution is, and then having a desire to move forward. Next comes the vigorous course of action, which is the work associated with steps 4 through 9. But there is an interesting pattern to look at. The interesting pattern regarding steps 4 through 9 is that steps 4 and 5 are looking at our lives and then discussing what we found with someone. Steps 6 and 7 are where we start to hook up with God, and steps 8 and 9 are where we correct the things that we had done in the past. Then steps 4 and 5 are all about getting things straight with ourselves. Steps 6 and 7 are all about getting things straight with God. And steps 8 and 9 are all about getting things straight with the people in our lives. So step 10 is all about us. Step 11 is all about God. And step 12 is all about other people. So when we look at these, I have some worksheets that are available for you. And these are some additional activities that you can do to really focus on what is the 3rd step for you. And for those of you who haven't been here before, if this is your first time, these worksheets are available as a free download. There is a workbook that you can download for free. When you put your email on the distribution list, you'll get the link along so that you can download any of these materials, as well as there's another folder with all of the forms with extra forms in them. So if we break this down, this is the 3rd step prayer. What you can do with this is when you get into these worksheets, it says, okay, God, I offer myself to thee. And then there's a space there for you to write and journal a little bit. Well, what does this mean to me? When I say I'm offering myself to God, what does that mean? So you write for yourself, what does that mean for you? This is just for your eyes only. Then the next phrase is to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Well, write what that means to you there. Then relieve me of the bondage of self. Then you have a spot to write that out. That I may better do thy will. What does that mean to you? Take away my difficulties. Again, there's another space to write that. That victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. Write what that means to you. And then may I do thy will always. So you want to, I always say that for this third step prayer, it's important that we understand what we're saying to God. So you want to understand totally what that means for you. And then just like your concept of a higher power might change as you move forward in working the steps, what you want, what you're willing to do it may also evolve. Our reality is that we're not in control of much, if anything, yet we act as if we were or should be in control of everything. So step 3 is our decision to let God be in control. And the best we can do at this point is give him a try. So again, this is where your faith comes in. Faith is a state of openness and trust. Therefore, the attitude of faith is to let go and become open to the truth, whatever that might be. So that's where you start looking at the truth. And then in the text again, there is another activity where you can write a letter to God. In other words, here it is. You're saying, okay, dear God, I need you in my life. Please help me too. And then you write what you're going to ask God to do for you. Then the other part of that, once you get that done, the next thing you want to do is spend a little bit of time in writing another letter to God, in telling God what you're willing to do to have him in your life. So what are you willing to do to God? You're asking God for something. The next thing you're doing is you're telling God what you're willing to do in order to have God be in your life. We now are getting into the next portion, which is we're starting step 4. And step 4 is made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. So for our purposes, each instruction on how to do the 4-step inventories of course, it's taken directly from the Big Book and done according to the instructions in the Big Book. So your commitment to doing these inventories is in direct proportion to how badly you want to have your life change. So before starting step 4, I have a little analogy that I like to use in describing steps 4 through 7. So if you pretend that you're about 7 years old and your mother tells you to clean your room, and you do it, but you're not happy about it. The next time your mother says, instead of telling you to clean your room, your mother says to you that she wants you to go through all of your things and put on your bed any clothes that do not fit or that you don't like anymore, and any toys that you have that you don't play with anymore, or anything you think that is just yucky that you don't like. So then you go and you do that. You go and you go through all your stuff. You go through all your stuff. You lay everything out on your bed, your clothes, your toys, your books, your shoes, everything, anything that you don't want anymore. It's now on your bed. Then you go get your mother. She comes in and you show her all the stuff that you don't want anymore. That's step 5. So the first thing is step 4 is when you take all the stuff that you don't want anymore, you put it on your bed. Then when you bring your mother in and you show it to her, that's step 5. The next thing that happens is that your mother asks you, are you sure that you don't want any of this stuff anymore? And because you are sure, we're going to take all of it now. We're going to bring it down. We're going to put it in boxes and bags, and we're going to bring it out to the car. And we're getting in the car and we're bringing it and donating it to the Salvation Army. Then once you get rid of all that stuff at the Salvation Army, that's step 6. Get rid of it. And then then you get rid of it. And now your mother takes you to the mall and buys you all new stuff and replaces that stuff that you got rid of. That's step 7. So it's just a neat little analogy in going through, cleaning out all the junk we don't want anymore is step 4 in seeing what it is. Sharing it with another person is step 5. Bringing it and getting rid of it is being entirely ready. Is step 6, and step 7 is getting all new stuff. So when we get into the 4th step, the 4th step actually is 4 separate inventories, and we have all of these 4th step inventory forms. The first inventory is for resentments. The second one is for fears, and the third is for harms. And the harms inventory is divided into 2, which is what gives us the 4. The first is the harms that we've caused other people, excluding our sexual behavior. And the second one is the harms that we've done that has to do with our sexual conduct. So the first one that we're going to start with, and again, these forms are in the workbook, and they're also available individually in the forms as Word documents. Some people like to write out and draw the lines and make the columns for themselves on a spiral notebook and open it up, which is fine. I personally prefer to type things out. It's just easier for me than to actually write it. But if you want to use the forms, you can print them out and you can write on the forms themselves, or you could use them as a Word document and type them up if you want to do it that way. So the first inventory that we're going to start working on is the resentment inventory. And this is on page 64 in the big book, where we listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. And page 65 provides the example. And of course, we're going to use the exact example from the big book. So in the big book, there is the famous list of names where we've got Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, my employer, my wife. And what you want to do is you want to get a blank sheet of paper and write it out. Or if you're like me and you like to type on the computer, you just put a blank document in front of you and you start listing them. And it doesn't matter. So you just want to take a blank sheet and you want to list everyone that you're upset with. And it doesn't matter if it's a big resentment or a small resentment, as long as your peace of mind is disturbed by this person, their name is written down. As long as whenever you think of that person or you hear their name, you get that. You want to put their name down. And then the next thing you do is, all right, we're going back here, we're making the list, and the list might take a while. So you're going through it and you're just listing all those names. You might have pages and pages of names, depending on how angry you are. And the next instruction, also on page 64, states we asked ourselves why we were angry. What was it that this person did that, in our mind, as my dear friend Howard would say, they deserve a special place in hell because of whatever it is that they did. So again, this is straight from the big book. these are the instructions for column 1. You take the first name from the list that you made, and then in column 2, you list all the reasons why you are upset with that person. So here we go. I'm resentful at Mr. Brown. You put each reason on a separate line and in a separate box in column 2. And when you're done listing all the resentments associated with this person, you move on to the second name and you do the same thing. And you continue doing this until you're done with all of the names listed. So you want to make sure that it's succinct, that there's no long descriptions, and definitely no justifications. Everything is just noun and verb. There's no emotions attached to this. No justifications, no stories, no explanations, no buts, okay? But you don't know what they did. No, it's only why we have this resentment towards them, why we're angry at them. So you're not going to put down that someone used you. What you're going to do is you're going to write how they used you, such as they borrowed money and they didn't pay you back, or they lied to you to get you to do something that you didn't want to do. So when we look here we have this is the famous list directly from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, my employer, my wife. So we've got, I'm resentful at Brown. I love, there's the t-shirt I saw it at the convention, but there's a t-shirt that I don't know where people buy it, but it says Mr. Brown needs his ass kicked. I'm resentful at Mr. Brown because of his attention to my wife. He told my wife about my mistress, and Brown might get my job at the office. Whoa, we got a problem with Mr. Brown. Then I've got a resentment against Mrs. Jones. She's a nut. She snubbed me. She committed her husband for drinking, and he's my friend. She gossips about me. My employer is unreasonable, unjust, overbearing, threatens to fire me for drinking and padding my expense account. And then my wife, of course, my wife misunderstands me. She nags me. She likes Brown. She has the nerve to want to have the house put in her name. How dare she? So this is the list. This is who they are. This is what they did. There's no emotions or anything associated with this. It's just basically it's behavioral. This is what they did. It has nothing to do with feelings or anything like that. It is behavioral. Behavior means that it's observable. I see what you did. That's all we're looking at here. So now that we've got this, and we've got this list of all of their sins against me that justifies me having them deserve a special place in hell. The next instruction I have to look at is on pages 64 and 65. And what it says there is that in most cases, it was found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relations, including sex, were hurt or threatened. On our grudge list, we set opposite each name our injuries. Was it our self-esteem, our security, our ambitions, our personal or sex relations that had been interfered with? See, this is where it's all about me. It's all about me. And this is where we start to look at these parts of self. Column 3 in the inventory is used to show how what is in column 2 hurt, threatened, or interfered with your parts of self. And the parts of self are our self-esteem, how you feel about yourself, your pride, your pocketbook, your money, your finances, or anything of a material nature. Your emotional security, how safe you feel in the world. Your ambitions, your plans for the future, both immediate and down the road. Your personal relationships, how you interact with others, and then your sex relationships. So when we look at the form, the next part of the form has these grid marks. And you can see you've got a column for all of these categories of the parts of self that would be affected. So you've got the SE stands for your self-esteem. The P stands for your pocketbook. The E is your emotional security. The A is your ambitions. The PR is your personal relationships, and the SR is your sex relationships. And then there's really no right or wrong answer as you go through this. But the next thing you're going to do is you're going to look at each one of these things that they did and then identify what part of self was affected. And again, there's really no right or wrong answer. You want to go quickly through it and go with your gut instinct on whether or not this part of self was hurt, threatened, or interfered with by whatever was listed in column 2. So, and I was kind of generous in this one, because when I go back and when I look at this, I realize that I probably could have checked off more of these boxes, but I checked off at least one just for demonstration's sake. But here we looked at, I'm resentful at Mr. Brown because of his attention to my wife. And if I'm totally honest, I could say it would affect probably my self-esteem and my emotional security. And I definitely, I checked off sex relations, but it could probably have affected even more than that. But then here we look at the next one. Brown told my wife about my mistress, so I checked off self-esteem and sex relations in this one. Brown might get my job at the office. Again, self-esteem, pocketbook, ambitions. Then, so what you're looking at is if what is in column 2 affected your self-esteem, how you feel about yourself, your pride, you put a check mark in the appropriate column, which would be your self-esteem. If what's in column 2 affected your pocketbook, your money, your finances, or anything of a material nature, you put a check mark in the column 3P. If what's in column 2 affected your emotional security, how you feel in the world, how safe you feel in the world, rather, you put a check mark in column 3ES, which is your emotional security. If what's in column 2 affected your ambitions, your plans for the future, both immediate and down the road, you put a check mark in column 3A for ambitions. If what's in column 2 affected your personal relations, how you interact with other people, you put a check mark in column 3, PR. And if what's in column 2 affected your sex relations, you put a check mark in column 3, SR. One little caveat is the more check marks you have, the angrier you are. So now the next instruction is on page 66. And here is where we turn back to the list, for it held the key to the future. We were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. We began to see that this world and its people really dominated us. In that state, the wrongdoing of others, fancied or real. In other words, it didn't have to be real. It could be my imagination. As an alcoholic, I have a pretty vivid imagination. So in that state, the wrongdoing of others, fancied or real, had the power to actually kill. How could we escape? What we had to do was put out of our minds the wrongs others had done, and we resolutely looked for our own mistakes. So, this is where we start to get into the next part. This is where we start to get into the nitty gritty when we get into column 4. So, for the sake of the image, I had to condense the parts of self for column 3 because we wouldn't have had enough room on the slide. So that's there's just a space there. And we're going to look now at the 4th column, which is column 4, how I got the ball rolling. Now, what I had to do in column 4, because this was not in the big book, but I kind of took some creative license and just guessing what some of the antics we alcoholics get ourselves in trouble with. I made up some stuff to put in there as to how did I get the ball rolling? What did I do? So I just took some creative license and came up with some fictitious scenarios that our alcoholic friend from the big book might have done to come up with these resentments towards the people on his list. So, for example, if I look at this column, what I'm looking at is column 4. How did I get the ball rolling? What was my part? See, we never want to look at ourselves. And this is the difficult part because we don't typically look at how we're responsible. It's much easier to blame other people. And this was where we really get the part where one of the things, even from the very beginning, when I came into the program, when they would say, when you point the finger at other people, you've got 3 fingers pointing back at you. That's my part, 3 times as much. So I've got to look at how I got the ball rolling. And when I start to look at this column, it's what starts to change the way I think. I'm not beating myself up. I'm only looking at how I got the ball rolling. So now we're going to look at the next example we're going to have is just going to be column 2 and column 4. Why I have a resentment against this person. And now I'm looking at what I did. And this is where I embellished in coming up with some scenarios because the big book doesn't give us those examples. So we can only imagine. Then the real thing was probably even worse. But the big book says, so our troubles we think are of our own making. This column here, column 4, indicates how we did that. The ego is the part of you that feeds on and maintains the illusion of power and control, and it has a slogan of its own. And that slogan is, it's not my fault. It's not my fault. It's not my fault. It's not my fault. I like to say it's the Bart Simpson slogan because he's always saying, it's not my fault. I didn't do it. I didn't do it. So whatever happens to you, the ego assures you it's not your fault. The fault, and there always is a fault, lies with other people, your spouse, your partner, your children, your parents, your boss, your colleagues, or perhaps it could even be racial, ethnic, political, religious, anything other than you. But step 4 silences that ego because it is your fault. Perhaps not all your fault, but enough of your fault for you to begin to notice how you got the ball rolling. So in the previous examples, our alcoholic friend from the big book got the ball rolling because he was a drunk, he was unreliable, he was a thief and a cheat. So let's go back and look at this. All right, I'm resentful at Mr. Brown because of his attention to my wife. He told her about my mistress and he may get my job. So how did I get the ball rolling? Well, I was drunk and I didn't come home from work. I stayed out all night, and my wife was worried because I didn't come home. So she called Brown and they went out and they were looking for me, and they found me shacked up at the hotel with my girlfriend. So now it's Brown's fault that my wife knows that I'm cheating on her. And on top of everything else, I was drinking on the job. Sounds like something a drunk would do. I'm resentful at Mrs. Jones because she snubbed me. She had her husband, who's my friend, committed for drinking, and she gossips about me and my drinking. Well, what I did to get the ball rolling was I was over her house drinking with her husband, and we were drunk, and I broke her table. So she was upset, and she doesn't want me coming over her house anymore. Resentful at my employer because he's unjust, he's overbearing, he threatens to fire me for drinking and padding my expense account. Well, I come to work drunk. I do pad my expense account, therefore I'm robbing from the company. I'm not reliable. I come in late. I don't do my work because I'm drunk. So I deserve to be in trouble with my boss. And then, of course, my wife, she misunderstands and nags me. She doesn't understand me. And she wants the house put in her name. But I come home drunk every day and I spend my paycheck at the bar. So that kind of gives you an idea of how I got the ball rolling. Because again, I got the ball rolling because I was drunk, I was unreliable, I was a thief, and I was a cheat. So the important thing to remember about column 4 is it is all about you, and it doesn't matter what anyone else did. You find your part in it, whether it was something you did, said, thought, or did not do, did not say, did not think, some action on your part. And this is where you keep it simple. You don't beat yourself up. Don't add any more than you have to. Keep it as short and concise as you can. You're looking for verbs that describe what you actually did that caused what happened in column 2. You want to look for how you got the ball rolling. Now, there is a clarification here, because there can be an occasion where you didn't have a part. So, for example, maybe you were molested as a child, or you were raped, or your child was murdered, your parents were alcoholics or drug addicts, you were a crime victim, something like that. Those were things that were not your fault. And though those are things that have to be dealt with oftentimes from a therapeutic nature, especially if you were a crime victim, where something horrible happened to you. That's part of being human. If you have PTSD and those kinds of things, trauma issues, but what happens is that sometimes we have to look at what we do with it. And maybe this thing has happened many, many years ago. And yet my part of it is I refuse to get the required help in order to get myself through it. So I stay uh, and I drink just to numb that out. Well, that's my part because I'm not getting the help that I need to have in order to do that. Or maybe I know for myself, when something happened to me, I didn't blame myself for what happened to me, but when I took a step back and I looked at it from an objective standpoint, I chose to go with that person when my own intuition was saying, you shouldn't be hanging out with this person. You shouldn't be going here. But I didn't listen to that. Um, and that was where my character defect of being a people pleaser came in, because I wanted people to like me. So that was my part, that I was a people pleaser and I was afraid to say, no, I'm not going. So it can get a little bit tricky in here. I know Howard does a really good example when he talks about what happened to him when he was a kid, and for 40 years he stayed angry about it and hated the person, didn't go to family functions because that person would be there. And that's my part, because I never did anything about it. I never said anything about it. So it can get a little bit tricky once we take ourselves out of the victim role and look at it objectively. But in no way whatsoever is there any blame for something that happened to you that was not your fault. And that's something that we do need to clarify. Thank you so much for your participation. I hope you enjoyed the workshop, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. And now, please join me in our closing prayer, which is St. Faustina's Prayer for Mercy. Eternal God, in whom mercy is endless and the treasury of compassion inexhaustible, look kindly upon us and increase your mercy in us, that in difficult moments we might not despair nor become despondent, but with great confidence submit ourselves to your holy will, which is love and mercy itself. Amen.